November 16, 2022. The courtroom went silent as Darrell Brooks stood before Judge Jennifer Doro, moments away from hearing a sentence that would erase any remaining future he thought he had. 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Hundreds of additional years stacked on top, ensuring he would never breathe free air again. But what most people fail to understand is that the sentence itself was not the true punishment. The real punishment began after the courtroom doors closed and the world stopped watching. On November 21, 2021, Brooks drove his SUV through the Waukesha Christmas parade, turning a celebration into chaos. 6 people were killed. 62 others were injured. 8-year-old Jackson Sparks was marching with his baseball team. Tamara Durand and Lee Owen were dancing with the dancing grannies. Wilhelm Hospel was 81 years old. In minutes, lives were erased and families were shattered forever. Judge Doro said Brooks had a heart bent on evil and that there was no treatment for that kind of darkness. Wisconsin does not allow the death penalty, so Brooks would live. And that is where his real nightmare began. Many believe life in prison is mercy. They think it is the softer alternative to execution. They are wrong. What Brooks faces is something far more relentless than death. Because death ends. What he is enduring does not. Right after his conviction, Darrell Brooks was absorbed into the American prison system, a bureaucratic machine that turns human lives into schedules, files, and security classifications. His first stop was Dodge Correctional Institution, a facility built to process men who will likely never walk free again. From there, between 2024 and early 2025, officials transferred him to the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility, a supermax institution designed for total isolation and psychological dominance. Brooks was confined to a cell measuring approximately 6 feet by 9 feet.
Bare concrete walls.
A steel door with a narrow slot for food trays. A thin mattress placed on a metal slab. A stainless steel toilet and sink welded together.
No personal belongings.
No privacy.
No softness.
The realization settles in slowly that this space is not temporary housing. It is a permanent boundary that defines every future moment of existence. He spent 23 hours a day inside that cell. The remaining hour was labeled recreation, though nothing about it resembles freedom. Isolation at this level is not simply uncomfortable. It is psychologically destructive. Research on long-term solitary confinement shows it causes paranoia, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, hallucinations, and emotional breakdown. For inmates with release dates, there is at least an endpoint to imagine. For someone sentenced to die in prison, there is no finish line. Time becomes a repeating loop rather than a journey. During recreation, Brooks was escorted in restraints to another concrete enclosure, slightly larger, surrounded by razor wire and armed watchtowers. He could see the sky, but the framing of steel and concrete reminded him that even air was conditional. Other inmates observed him during these brief moments. They knew his crimes. In prison culture, certain offenses place a person at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy, and killing children in a public celebration is among the most despised acts imaginable. Brooks entered prison with a reputation that preceded him, and reputations inside prison can be more dangerous than official classifications. In January 2025, without warning, the Wisconsin Department of Corrections transferred Brooks out of state to the South Dakota State Penitentiary. Even his attorney learned about the move through media inquiries. Officials offered vague security reasons and refused to elaborate. The timing was severe. Brooks was in the process of pursuing post-conviction appeals, navigating a system that is complex even for trained attorneys. The transfer disrupted his access to legal resources, communication, and institutional law libraries. This moment exposed a reality that rarely enters public discussion. Lifers are not treated like death row inmates. They receive fewer resources, less media attention, and minimal advocacy. Brooks was entitled to one automatic appeal. After that, legal representation was no longer guaranteed. No high-profile law firms volunteered to defend him. No innocence organizations invested in his case. He was left to interpret legal procedures from inside a restricted environment with limited access to documents and computers. In South Dakota, Lockdowns and internal investigations reportedly restricted his access even further. Brooks missed a key January 7, 2026 deadline to file appeal documents related to the Waukesha parade case. Courts ordered responses from officials, but procedural deadlines carry immense weight. Each missed filing narrowed his remaining legal avenues while time continued to advance without pause. This highlights a stark contrast in the justice system. Death row inmates receive heightened scrutiny, multiple layers of appeal, and global advocacy. Their cases attract activists, journalists, and legal scholars. Lifers, by contrast, often disappear into institutional obscurity. Many legal experts argue that life without parole is more severe than execution. Execution ends suffering in minutes. Life imprisonment extends suffering across decades, often accompanied by inadequate medical care and prolonged physical and psychological decline. Brooks is now living what tens of thousands of people experience under life without parole sentences. It is not living in the conventional sense. It is existing in a suspended state where the future is identical to the present and hope becomes structurally impossible. Permanence becomes the punishment. His situation inside prison was further worsened by his behavior during trial. Brooks chose to represent himself, transforming the courtroom into a public spectacle. He refused to acknowledge his own name, interrupted proceedings, and relied on pseudo-legal theories associated with sovereign citizen ideology. The judge eventually relocated him to a separate courtroom and muted his microphone to maintain order. He was removed multiple times for refusing to follow basic legal protocol. During sentencing, victims and survivors described the trauma he inflicted. Parents recalled searching for children amid chaos. Families honored those who died. Many demanded the maximum punishment. Brooks reacted with visible defiance, rolling his eyes during victim impact statements. That gesture circulated widely and became a defining image. In prison culture, remorse can influence how an inmate is perceived. His lack of visible remorse ensured his reputation would be permanently toxic. Sherry Sparks, the mother of 8-year-old Jackson Sparks, described feeling gutted and broken, saying it sometimes hurt to breathe. Her testimony, along with dozens of other victim statements, created a permanent narrative that follows Brooks through the correctional system. Court transcripts are read. Stories circulate. Reputations travel faster than official paperwork. Judge Jennifer Dorow's final assessment was blunt. She described Brooks as having a heart bent on evil, referencing multiple mental health evaluations that confirmed he understood right from wrong. His family raised concerns about his mental health, but the court rejected those arguments. In the official record, he became defined by that phrase. A heart bent on evil. Inside prison, labels matter, and this label eliminated any narrative of rehabilitation or redemption. When Brooks returned to court for additional sentencing in September 2024, officials wheeled him into the courtroom restrained at the waist and wrists, a visual reminder that the system now viewed him as a permanent security risk rather than a person. Authorities described the restraints as precautionary, but the image carried symbolic weight. He was no longer treated as a defendant awaiting judgment. He was treated as an object that required containment even while seated and surrounded by guards. The numerical breakdown of his sentence reads like a calculation designed to remove doubt. 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Hundreds of additional years for dozens of counts of reckless endangerment. More years added for domestic violence charges in the weeks before the parade attack. After a certain point, the arithmetic becomes abstract. Whether it is 6 life terms or 700 years, the outcome is identical. He will die in custody, not as a possibility, but as a logistical certainty written into court records. Wisconsin does not permit the death penalty, so execution was never an option. Some victims' families stated they would have preferred that outcome, believing it would provide a sense of finality. Instead, Brooks received a punishment criminologists argue is harsher. A slow erosion of autonomy carried out across decades, where time itself becomes an instrument of discipline and suffering. At 41 years old, assuming an average life expectancy, Brooks may spend 4 more decades inside this environment. That translates into tens of thousands of mornings that begin with the same fluorescent lights, the same metal door, and the same institutional routine. Aging inside prison is not simply aging in confinement. It is aging in a system not designed for comfort, dignity, or comprehensive healthcare. Maximum security and supermax facilities are austere. Overcrowding is common. Violence is a risk. Access to medical care is often delayed by bureaucracy and security procedures. Chronic illnesses can worsen while inmates wait for appointments or approvals. Prisoners with cancer, liver disease, diabetes, and heart conditions sometimes deteriorate with limited intervention, their suffering extended by neglect and indifference rather than deliberate cruelty. Across the United States, life without parole sentences have increased dramatically over the past 2 decades, while death row populations have declined. Tens of thousands of people now live under sentences that guarantee they will never leave prison alive. By comparison, only a few thousand remain on death row. The justice system has shifted from execution to prolonged confinement, replacing an end with an indefinite continuation of punishment. For Brooks, that shift means the permanent loss of human experiences. He will never decide where to go, what to eat, or when to sleep without institutional approval. He will never walk freely outdoors, feel rain without supervision, or sit alone without being monitored. Every conversation is recorded. Every visit is regulated. Every movement requires permission. Identity becomes a file number, and personal agency becomes an illusion managed by policy. The psychological toll of this existence accumulates and relentlessly. Isolation and routine erode memory, motivation, and emotional stability. Without milestones or future plans, time becomes a weight rather than a resource. Hope becomes irrational because there is no structural pathway to release. For many lifers, the absence of an end date is more psychologically devastating than the harshness of daily conditions. Inside prison, days blur into a repetitive loop of meals, counts, and controlled movement. Seasons lose meaning when every day follows identical schedules. Holidays arrive and pass without celebration. Family contact is mediated by glass, microphones, and strict time limits. Friendships are shaped by survival rather than trust. Over years and decades, the outside world becomes an abstraction remembered through fading memories and rare updates from visitors or letters. Psychologists warn that prolonged deprivation of autonomy and social connection can permanently alter cognition and personality. Emotional regulation deteriorates. Motivation fades. Identity becomes fragmented. By the time the body fails, the person who entered prison often no longer exists in any recognizable form. In this sense, life without parole functions as a slow erasure of self carried out through routine and confinement. During restitution hearings, Judge Darrell noted that Brooks might someday profit from the notoriety of his crimes through books or film adaptations. Even if such profits were directed toward restitution, the possibility itself caused additional pain for victims' families. The idea that tragedy could generate revenue underscores the imbalance between public fascination and private suffering, where perpetrators remain in headlines while victims become footnotes. As Brooks sits in a cell far from the courtroom where his fate was sealed, his appeals narrow and public attention fades. There will be no dramatic execution date, no final statement broadcast to the world. There will only be aging, illness, and repetition. A slow progression toward death that lacks spectacle but never pauses, where punishment is measured not in moments but in years. The families of those killed in the Waukesha parade will never see their loved ones again. Their lives were altered in minutes by a single act of violence. Brooks will spend decades confronting the consequences of those minutes inside institutions designed to make time itself part of the punishment. Some will call that justice. Others will call it cruelty. But the reality remains. His sentence is not a single event. It is a lifetime of moments stacked together until nothing remains but records, routines, and silence. Judge Darrell acknowledged in later hearings that Brooks could one day exploit the notoriety of his crimes through interviews, books, or dramatizations. Even the faint possibility is a wound for the families who lost everything, the idea that tragedy could become currency in a media economy that never forgets. Any earnings would be seized for restitution, but the psychological damage of that prospect cannot be quantified. So the question returns again and again. Is this fate worse than death? Brooks now sits in a high-security cell, far from Wisconsin, stripped of control, watching legal doors close one by one. He understands there will be no climax, no final spectacle, only the slow collapse of body and mind inside institutional walls. That is the architecture of life without parole. Not existence, but suspension, a body kept alive to experience the weight of time. The families of Jackson Sparks, Tamara Durand, Lee Owen, and Wilhelm Hospel carry an absence that cannot be appealed or reversed. Brooks erased their futures in minutes. What he received is not compassion. It is accountability stretched across decades, multiplied by routine, isolation, and irreversible aging. Death is an endpoint. His sentence is an infinite corridor. Some will call it justice. Others will call it cruelty. But the truth is clinical and unavoidable. A judge calculated permanence, and permanence is what he will endure. Every morning will mirror the last, and every night will confirm there is no exit from this design.